This reaction video is going to be a little bit different from all the ones I've done before. That's always been more contemporary. I reviewed Transitus the day it came available online. I looked back at the conceptual Sonic the Hedgehog prototype shortly after that became available. I've always tried to sort of do these reactions for stuff as they come up, but Persona 5 is a game that's been out for years. It's been out so long it's already been re-released with an expanded version as Persona 5 Royal that is widely regarded as one of the top 5 games from the last hardware generation. And I haven't played Persona 5 Royal. Even that now is a couple of years old. I've, because it's become available, gone back and re-experienced that original adventure. Baseline Persona 5 as it was, and the endings, this experience really has been playing on my mind. It's 96 hours put into this. It's occupied so much of my gaming time over the last couple of months. And I want to try and unpick my thoughts on this adventure and my new entry to the franchise. So this is my first ever Persona game, my first ever Shin Megami Tensei game. Now I am aware of both franchises, I'd seen them around, I'd definitely seen it on the PlayStation 2, the earlier games in the series, but I hadn't really been too involved or paid too much attention to either of them for some time. I think that changed when Joker was announced as the downloadable character on Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. And I looked at him, he's never been on a Nintendo console, what? And then I got really excited, thinking, okay, I've heard good things about Persona 5. The more I looked into it, the more well regarded the game appeared to be. And so hype began to build that maybe Persona 5's coming to Nintendo Switch. No such luck. What did appear on Nintendo Switch was Persona 5 Strikers, but as that was a sequel to an RPG plot-heavy game, I had almost zero interest in playing the sequel to a game that I hadn't seen the prequel of. So the job then became, okay, well, very, very interested in Persona 5. It looks like the kind of game I would like, but I've also heard that it's a mammoth experience. I don't know if you've seen it. There's a YouTuber called The Completionist who has revealed that Persona 5 is equally one of the games he's most enjoyed playing, but also as a completion experience, the ultimate nightmare. And there's quite a few RPG games that do this, that in order to see and do everything that the game has to offer, you have to play through it multiple times. And when one playthrough can be easily 80 or 90 hours, I'm not surprised he encountered a problem. So when I got my hands on a PlayStation 5 and the PlayStation Plus membership gave me availability for a selection of old games that had been highly regarded on the PlayStation 4, and as long as my online account remained, I would have free access to on the PlayStation 5 indefinitely. I immediately saw Persona 5 as one of them. It's not Royal, it's not now the definitive experience, but it is the fully patched, fully upgraded version of what was originally released. And so I went into it almost blind, only really with the knowledge that Joker was the protagonist, that it starred the Phantom Thieves, that it was an RPG set around a set number of palaces. I didn't know what the palaces were, didn't really know much cognition about it. I did know a little bit about the series. I'd seen the pictures of Persona 4 and there was that teddy bear companion, and for Persona 5 there appeared to be the cat, so it's a mascot driven franchise. Oh, it's so much more than that. From this point onwards, if you've got any interest in playing Persona 5 or you are scared of spoilers, you might want to stop now, because I'm not going to hold back. I want to dissect everything this game did to me, everything it meant to me, and what was strong and what was weak about it. Why has this game really sort of defined JRPGs over the last 5 years? It's definitely the strongest Japanese role-playing game original that I've played since the original Xenoblade Chronicles. That's really saying something. So, last spoiler warning, here we go. I can divide this game into eras, I suppose. There's the initial era where you're sort of discovering who the characters are. That is definitely when you're introduced to Joker, Ryuji, Anne, then Yusuke in Madarami's palace, and then I suppose it sort of this era lingers into meeting Makoto in Kaneshira's palace. Now, Kamoshida's palace is probably the entire length of that is a tutorial. That entire section is basically introducing what the game is and what it's about. You've not really got to experience everything the game has to offer till you've completed his palace. So with a 10-hour plus tutorial, you then have 2 more palaces where you can continue on carrying on this same adventure. And I was really enjoying everything the game was throwing at this stage. The setup of the story is top notch. I was instantly pulled into this injustice around the main character of Joker and what he was going through, and the way that he goes from one terrible situation being dropped straight into another, with Ryuji and Mishima being threatening expulsion from the school, and what Anne's going through with the suicide attempt of her best friend Shiho. The setup for Kamoshida is absolutely perfect, and it really pulls you into what the Phantom Thieves are, what they want to set out and do, what their goals and objectives are, and you're really emotionally invested in that palace and the takedown. It's also really creepy. It's a nice twist on European castle architecture stereotypes. It's all a bit authentic and historical, horror creepy vibes with the sexual tension of Kamoshida's lust played into there. This is a really excellent palace and the perfect opening to the game. This section of horror, though, I do feel becomes less prominent as you go through the game. When I first entered Kamoshida's palace, you didn't have a clue what was going on. There was a complete about face of complete miscomprehension, but the more you understand about the metaverse, the more that you begin to explain how it works, the more rote, the more common the game appears to be, and as it goes on I do feel it loses this sense of mystery. Things which are fresh and exciting and innovating in this first portion of the game, the more palaces you encounter, although there's always new elements, there's new aesthetics, it's the same concept, it does get repetitive. Now, Kamoshida's palace was followed up by Madarame's, which is excellent. The introduction to Yusuke, excellent. And then Makoto was probably my favourite team member, probably the most used through the battles after that. So I then enjoyed Kanashiro's palace, but I had to say, by the time I finished Kanashiro's palace, I was thinking that the game, okay, it's fallen into a bit of a routine here. And that is where I would put the end of the first era of this discovery phase of the game. And if I had to rate the game, if it ended there, okay, it would be a short game, but it's currently sitting comfortably as a 10 out of 10 video game experience for me. I've been introduced to dungeon crawling and the rush of trying to complete these palaces in a single night. Because I was aware that going into it, once I'd taken my view of exactly what was going on, the video game logic was you only have a certain number of days in the year. Every day uses up an activity. There's only so many days in the year. And so every time you do one activity, you are losing the ability to do others. So once I clocked, okay, I can either complete the palace in one day and then free up the rest of the month to do other things, or I can attempt the palace in multiple attempts. I was set. I was going to do every palace in the minimum number of days possible, which I did. It was a little bit soul destroying, a little bit grindy, particularly on Kamoshida's. The drive to level up my party to the point where they could actually just breeze through the enemies in Kamoshida's palace without using up my SP points took a long time, but once I was at that page, the game never became easy. The combat system is brilliant. Now, there's a criticism and a reason why Square Enix, the progenitors of the JRPG turn-based battle, active turn-based battle system, have turned away from this in games like Final Fantasy, is there is a complaint of course about turn-based battle systems where all you need to do is find a configuration of your party where you can heal faster than damage comes in, while still dishing out damage in return. So in Final Fantasy 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way through to 10, maybe even 12, all you have to do is deal out damage whilst healing. It's an easy combination. Of course there's more to it than that, but how do you design a combat system that demands more from the player than just falling into this easy routine? Now, Persona's taken the Pokemon approach of weaknesses and strengths, but it goes one step further. If you get hit by a weakness, you are actually knocked down and the enemy player gets a second move. Meaning if you can chain combos against different enemies, picking off different weaknesses on different enemies, you can essentially baton pass. Each time you pass the baton, your characters become stronger. You can wipe out an enemy party in an entire move, and they have just the same strengths against you. They can wipe out an unprepared team. I really wasn't anticipating how difficult the learning curve of the turn-based combat in this game was going to be, but I absolutely admired it. All the way up to, I'd say, the last third of the game where I just sort of developed an overpowered party. Once I got past Kanashiro, at this point I was saying 10 out of 10 game, but it's becoming too repetitive. I am not surprised a lot of people online have told me that they think Futaba's palace is the high point of the game. It's definitely tonally the turning point in the game. This is where you go from this era 1. The first phase of the game is this discovery where you set up who the Phantom Thieves are. This second phase, through the summer, with Futaba and Okumura's palace, leading into Sainajima's palace, is where you sort of get into the main thrust of the plot. You really, I liked the way that this game sort of turned on its head and really interrogated what it would mean to be the Phantom Thieves. How would a country respond? The first phase of the game is really deeply personal. It's about the specific rivalry and grudge and danger that the characters like Kamoshida, Madarame and Kaneshiro are putting the characters in. If they don't do this, if they don't become Phantom Thieves, if they don't exact their justice, then their lives are screwed. They have to do it to save their own bacon or protect people around them. But for Futaba, Okumura, the stakes are much more ephemeral. This is about the state of Japan, of society as a whole. And so I quite like the game's sort of refocusing aspect here as it zoomed out from the characters. They're now becoming much more altruistic, but whilst simultaneously being altruistic, they're also being focused on in terms of their own ego is taking command. You can see that in the conflict between Ryuji and Yusuke, as one of them becomes more and more obsessed with, we're going to be famous, and the other one is absolutely adamant that that's not the goal. He didn't want to take down Okumura. However, the situation, and I suppose Morgana, I can see why some people really have trouble with this character. The conflict where Morgana abandons the party did feel a little forced, but it was an effective way of bringing Haru in. I really wished Haru had been introduced earlier because I really never felt I got the time to spend with her that I needed at the end of the game. Because you go straight from the end of Okumura's palace into the final phase of the game. Nijima's palace leads into the plot twist, which leads into the entire setup of that opening sequence where Joker has been arrested by the police. Now, this was a really effective framing device. This was done beautifully, with the idea that everything up to this point is essentially told in recollection by Joker to Nijima during his interrogation. And when you get to this point, you haven't actually stolen her heart. She's not really the adversary. She's a stooge. She's been planted there. It was a false target to lure you out, to let you be captured. I didn't make the wrong choice. I wasn't executed by Akichi at this point. And when did I realise Akichi was the traitor? Well, I'm sad to say, because the game not forced me out of her palace and said to me, you can't complete this until a certain date, I might not have known for certain that he was the traitor. However, once I was forced out of Nijima's palace, once Akichi was in my party, I went to the outfitter's shop in Shibuya and I tried to buy new guns and new armour for Akechi, and I couldn't. And I realised immediately, okay, every other party member I've had to this point, I can restock, I can give them armour and buy for them unique weapons, unique abilities. And for this guy, there's nothing. He's a temporary cast member. And if he's a temporary cast member, it means either he's going to die or he's the traitor. So I went from suspicion about this character to absolute certainty that this is the way the plot was going, based on that one mechanic of game design. And this is why I think really studying the way all your game mechanics fit together. It's something that Persona 5 is normally pretty effortless in. It's also stylish, it's also well seamlessly integrated. But just the fact, and I know why they do it, they don't want you to spend because money is not something you can get a ton of in this game unless you grind, unless you really set the game up in your favour in a specific way that will allow you to specifically fluff enemies for cash, which is just grinding. You don't have a ton of cash to spend if you're just playing normally. And so I can completely get it. The game designers don't want people to waste hard-earned cash on buying equipment and armor and weapons for a character that they can't use because he's only there temporarily. However, by helping the players to make that choice, to avoid falling into that trap, they clued me into the biggest plot twist of the game over a month early in real-world game time. And I was a little bit disappointed that the moment I'd spotted that, I knew how this was going to play out. Yeah, that's my one disappointment, that I wish I hadn't been so clued into the game design that I'd spotted this. But anyway, Akechi, that one complaint aside, it's a really well done character. He's a brilliant antagonist for the Phantom Thieves. I gather his role is expanded even more in Royal. Not something I'm going to experience for a while, because the 96 hours I poured into Persona 5 is enough for me. I can only do one big RPG every year or two that takes up too much of my time. And I can't jump straight from playing Persona 5 into Persona 5 Royal. I've got too much other stuff in my life to go into. Also, as cool as the music has been, and the music in this game is brilliant, I think playing through it straight again would be overkill right now. So, Akechi's betrayal and turning on you, and this weird state of affairs where he thinks the bad guys seem to have won, but secretly you're alive and you're plotting your revenge, leading into taking down Masayoshi Shido, is absolutely brilliant. I loved that lead-in. I loved Shido's palace. It's not my favourite palace, but the mood, the triumph of it, the plot twist at the end where Akechi comes to take you down, and then after a brilliant boss battle is brought down by himself, great plotting. And then the Shido boss battle, with the first time you hear that full music playing out of Rivers in the Desert, one of my favourite lyrical songs in the game. It's just epic. And it really is a challenging boss battle. The 5 stages as Shido goes through his various forms, first mounted on that champion, then just a 1-on-4 battle with him against you. But every time you think you've taken him down, he just bulks up, powers up, grows more muscles, becomes even more powerful. It really, after the other bosses in the game, Kamishida, you saw the sort of perverted lust, Madarame, the fake artwork, you saw the fake bank, you saw the monstrous perversion of a loving mother, and then you saw the Emperor Palpatine Darth Vader hybrid that was Okumura, and the gambling Najima. They're really good conceptual boss battles, but I think Shido was my favourite. This is just one guy so full of his self-belief, so full that he had the right and the power and the worthiness to take charge because no one else was justifiable to do it. That was the brilliant emblematic idea of how self-belief can power someone through, right up into the point that self-belief ran out. And then we enter the final phase of the game, and this is the point Atlus were really desperate to avoid spoilers about this third of the game, and I can see why. Because after you've beaten Shido, and the game does this deliberately, after you beat him, you don't get the happy ever after ending you were expecting. You change his heart, you make him confess, you make him... The guy's just been elected Prime Minister, and yet he's gone on national TV telling everyone, I'm a monster, I need to be forgiven, I've committed horrendous crimes. But the country just shrugs its shoulders and ignores it. It feels really weird, it feels really disheartening. And I got, the story still had me hooked at this point, but I've got to say that the final areas, that final period of time, it felt like time, that the clock winding down as you go through the days through December, time running out. You've only got a limited period left to finish maxing out your confidence. And I really felt like there was a noose tightening around my neck as I struggled to get the guts stat maxed out so I could finish the Gunseller's questline. And I couldn't do it. I managed to max the guts out. I managed to get the next confident meeting with him, but there was no time to go any further. I failed to max him out despite my best intentions. I did max the majority of the cast out. Ryuji and Anne, Hifumi, Jihaya, Sojiro, Futaba, all of them maxed, but not Kid in the arcade shop, not Oya, the journalist, and not Iwai, the gunseller, and not Haru either, because as I said, she was introduced to me too late, which just felt like a shame. But I'm not going to replay the game just to see those conversations. But the final area, this, once the noose is tightened and you decide to enter Mementos to take the whole metaverse down, and finding out that the final boss was the Holy Grail really knocked me for six. And I'd really like to know from someone who's played the previous Persona games what they thought of this last minute plot twist. It's a common fact in JRPGs, but I really felt playing through Persona 5 that this game was doing it differently. Yes, it had pulled the focus back as it had gone through the first phase of the game to the second phase of the game. I liked the way that it took the focus off the personal relationships with the characters and really looked at society. But this was going one step further. This was examining the human condition. And the idea that ultimately what we all dream about is someone to take our burdens from us, someone that can just take our worries, take all our negative feelings and sort it all out. And that's what the Holy Grail is. That's what we're all searching for. Something that can just deal with all of that negative crap for us. So yeah, conceptually, I see it. Conceptually, I see how what was waiting at the bottom of Mementos was the Holy Grail, this great ultimate treasure that is taking all of our negative problems, because that's what we want. We want something and someone that will do that. But then when that starts trying to merge the real world with Mementos, when it does this cognition flip to wipe the Persona users, the Phantom Thieves, from existence, I see why this was a way to tie the plot threads up. I see why this was a way to close the story down and say, well, this is it. This is the end of the Phantom Thieves journey. To retroactively say, via the existence of Morgana, this was your entire purpose for forming in the first place, I feel less comfortable. I feel like it's pulled the heart out of my relationship with these characters ever so slightly. But I think that largely is just because this last portion of the game was so short. I'd already fully explored mementos to the bottom during normal playtime. I'd really, at this stage, when I go down to that, I was able to go straight down to the bottom and just pursue the prison in this late stage. There's nothing wrong with this last phase of the game. It's a good game, but I've got to say it feels tonally like a very different game from the first phase with the first 3 palaces. It almost felt like I was playing a completely different game. That's not a bad thing, it's excellently done. But that, I can't work out when the tonal shift happened. It doesn't happen on the day that the plot twist of Akechi and Najima and the does Joker die after this heist go or not. It wasn't then. But at some point after Shido's Palace, this game turned on me. And I can't work out my feelings about the game turning on me. It's trying to make a statement. It's trying to make a big point about the status of mankind. And after the whole theme of the game was about rebellion and about standing up against the societal diktats, to actually pull it out and say, well, no, it's about the desires of humanity as a whole, should have felt more climactic than it did. It wasn't anticlimactic. That final boss was great. I really enjoyed taking it down. With each stage of the battle, a new arm representing new sin of lust or gluttony or whatever popping up to take aim at me wasn't as epic as the battle against Shido was. And I think the problem, and it was done deliberately, is after Shido, you see all these other characters standing around him and muttering the hangers-on, saying, oh, we're not going to let him die, we're in our necks if this goes wrong. And you hear this ominous voice saying, we will continue his great work. And the game very deliberately never lets you see who that was. Fine, because actually for the plot the game is telling, it doesn't matter. Whoever that voice was, they're just representing the mood of society. They just want someone to take their problems away. They want life to be easy. Shido's down. What's the easiest thing to do? Ignore the fact he's down and carry on with someone else as if that was him. The identity of the person saying it doesn't matter. It's the mood of humanity that pushes, someone was going to say it, someone was going to prop Shido up. It's always a sort of trope in video games, and it happens here in Persona. Load-bearing bosses defeat the boss and the whole palace, the whole dungeon comes crumbling around. Now, Persona 5 really makes a twist on this and a joke on this. The palace is a cognition inside someone's mind. You destroy the shadow Kamoshida, and of course his haunted castle is going to disappear. He's no longer got this distorted view of reality. So they're able to play on that trope of load-bearing bosses. But then you defeat Shido, and yes, you were inside Shido's perverted view of a ship, but his perverted view of society is not taken down. His expectations, his plan for the future is what the society was going towards. So we don't need to know who was propping him up. We don't need to know who the hangers-on were. It was society as a whole. But that also makes it feel a little bit daunting that that's the way the game wants to go. It doesn't want us to know who the true villains are. The true villains aren't people. Okay, it's got these 6 or 7 figureheads it holds up and dangles in front of you as targets. But it also seems to be wanting to make a statement that none of these were originally evil. None of them were worthy of being crowned this architect of doom in their own right. Okay, you personally, particularly in those first 3, you personally had a invested stake where if you didn't do something about the threat to your personhood, your future was destined for a terrible fate. But after that point, things just start to go a little bit impersonal. Really do appreciate, though, the way all of the story threads tie together. I almost didn't need, and was a little bit disappointed, that they tied Kamoshida, Madarame and Kaneshiro into Shido at the end. Futaba and Sojiro and their story thread, of course that ties into Shido. Then Sei Nijima and Makoto, their story thread, of course that ties into Shido. Okumura's thread ties nicely into Shido, but I never felt the need at the game when they just have these 2 lines that go, oh yeah, Shido was supporting Kamoshida, Madarame and Kaneshiro. Didn't need to hear about that. I almost liked the fact that they were personal quests out of self-preservation. Then Futaba was about empathy and love for friends and family and helping those close to you. And the Nakamura, you could almost see him the same way. Whilst you had the driving online presence demanding that you take the Nakamura, the thing that actually decided it and swung it was the threat to Haru's personhood. And so, in my head, brilliant experience, but the game felt better in its individual sections than the sum of the totality. That said, I completely get why people have fallen in love with those characters. All of them, without fault, are brilliantly written, brilliantly voiced, and a joy to discover more about. This is a really excellent game. The last minute twist about the use of the Holy Gale and the desires of mankind threw me a little bit for 6, but I was already fully invested before that. I was on board and I absolutely adored all of the plot twists. Persona 5 has retroactively become one of my favourite RPG games in history. Now, I'm gonna need a little bit of time to reflect on that and see if it moves, remains there, moves higher up that list, or if once time passes I start to forget about some of the things that I loved about this. It's really got me interested in going back to Persona 4 and 3, or even 2 and 1, or the upcoming or new Shin Megami Tensei game on the Switch, or even any of the older ones in the franchise. Atlus really needs to make these games more accessible. The reason despite Persona 5 entering my radar when Joker was announced for Smash Brothers, but the fact I only played it a few years later in 2021 is purely because until 2021 I didn't have a console that I could get it accessibly on. Had it come out on Switch back when Joker was announced for Smash, I would have played it immediately. Now I want to play Persona 4 Golden, but it's either go hunt down a Vita or install it on PC. But for these 80 to 90 hours for playing games, I'm going to need that on a portable system, or I'm going to have to wait a few more years and hope nothing else big comes out in the meantime. Which Persona game should I play next? Or Shin Megami Tensei 5 if that's looking good? I'm interested, I'm keen to find out more. I'm pulled in. This has been a great experience. And for anyone who's listened the whole way through this, thank you. Hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to A Friend Remembers. We're hoping to do more reaction videos like this in the near future. Definitely got one planned for the next week if things work out. And for the weekly retrospectives on slightly older content, usually even older than Persona 5. If you're of the generation thinking that Persona 5 is now a little bit of a retro game, just wait till you see what I've been looking at recently.